What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and oh boy is this video going to be going into some weird topics today. I have a question for you. Do you think gaming today is pandering too much? Do you think there's far too much emphasis on gender and politics in gaming? Well, according to someone at Insomniac Games, there's simply not enough of it and we need to do more if you can believe that. Beyond this, I will also talk about Neil Druckmann and The Last of Us, as well as Stellar Blade giving the players the win and more. To begin, let's start with this insane article from DualShockers that's titled, "We need to pull every lever we have. Insomniac's narrative director discusses lack of LGBTQ content in video games." So DualShockers spoke to Mary Kenny, who's the narrative director of the upcoming Marvel's Wolverine game, which already tells me that the game will likely be cooked into oblivion when it comes to identity politics. Which saddens me greatly since I've wanted a new Wolverine game for years, and yet I'm likely going to get super pandering game instead. According to Mary Kenny of Insomniac, video games are not diverse enough. Which for anybody who actually plays video games and keeps up with current news, we all have to ask, what the hell is this person smoking exactly? Because everywhere I look in a Western sense especially, all I see is LGBT representation, literally everywhere. There's laws put in place where if you misgender people, you can be thrown in jail. There's pride events. They have an entire month to be pandered to in June by companies across the board too. There's so much LGBT representation these days, it's ridiculous. How many newer Western-made games have completely replaced their character creators with stuff like body type 1 or 2 instead of male or female? The answer is all of them, by the way. Even Japanese games are adhering to that idea, and the terms male or female, they just don't exist apparently anymore. Just looking at the highlights of this article is crazy. Like, listen to this. LGBTQ gamers still don't feel seen in the gaming industry. Insomniac Associate Narrative Director Mary Kenny emphasizes the importance of designing games that make players feel accepted and important. The gaming industry has a long way to go in terms of queer representation despite the significant number of LGBTQ+ players. How the hell are LGBTQ players not seen in today's media? They're everywhere, in everything. Almost any commercial I see has LGBTQ representation, every show too. Especially in the Western sense, you have flags of pride and more scattered literally everywhere, like come on now. This just confirms what I've been saying since forever, which is that you could never appease these people ever. It's impossible. You could give them the entire world and then they complain you didn't also give them the moon or Jupiter. Like, you can't appease these sorts of groups, and it's already gotten to the point of borderline ridiculousness already. To go beyond this is financial destruction for these companies. Need I remind you, Mary Kenny was one of the prime defenders of Sweet Baby Inc. back in March when the whole Gamergate 2 thing happened. There was an article from that Park Place back in March about it. Here's what it said. Marvel's Wolverine Associate Narrative Director Mary Kenny attempts to defend Sweet Baby Inc. by gaslighting readers. Here's Mary Kenny, the person who says we must pull all the levers representation said about Sweet Baby back then, and I quote, "Some of you don't seem to understand how narrative consulting on games works, but don't worry, I do. Yes, this is about Sweet Baby because I've worked with that team and they're one of the finest in the business. It starts with dev teams have an idea. Maybe they already have an outline of their story and a core gameplay loop. Maybe they've got a whole script and a playable build. Either way, something is missing. Could be any number of things. A character feels underbaked. Maybe a whole faction. The backstory of a map has weak sauce world building. And no one on the team has time to do the research and brainstorming to make it cool. Maybe the dev team has gotten a ton of notes from publishers and executives on things that aren't working in the game. Maybe the notes are all internal. The team knows something is wrong but not how to identify or fix it. Wherever you are in development and whenever the notes are coming from, the problem is the same. Something's wrong. And the team can't figure out how to fix it. That's when you call Sweet Baby Inc. This next part is key because some of you seem really confused. Narrative consultants do not get final say. And they don't override the core dev team and leads. It doesn't get into the game if we don't approve it. They consult, they do research, pitch ideas, give feedback, and maybe even write scripts, but none of that gets into the game unless the core dev team agrees with it. I'm going to keep saying that because it's key. Sweet Baby is not, nor is any consulting group coming in to wreck games. They're helping smooth out plots and deepen characters. They ease the burden on the core narrative team. They're additive in every way, and if the dev team disagrees with them on something, the dev team doesn't take the note. It really is that simple. So no, Sweet Baby did not kill your game. Of course, they had nothing to do with the layoffs. They gave notes, pitches, advice, and research. The studio made the final call on what went in the game. If you have beef, it's with us. Keep it with us. I'm so lucky to have worked with that team. I hope to do so again. I hope asshats don't drive out some of the most talented, passionate people we've got." End quote. So according to Mary Kenny, who again thinks there isn't enough LGBT representation in everything already, she also thinks that Sweet Baby is a godsend when it comes to video games, and she also says that Insomniac will work with them in the future. Remember that in terms of Insomniac anyway, Sweet Baby was directly involved with Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2. And I think as time has gone on, many players can agree that Spider-Man 2's story, especially in its world, it felt worse and underbaked compared to the 2018 game. Peter Parker was made weaker at certain story moments for no other reason so that Miles and MJ could step up and take leading roles. Peter isn't even the one to save New York City in the end of the game either. It's Miles who ends up becoming the main Spider-Man going forward for Insomniac's Universe 2. They even confirmed that. And you gotta have brain damage if you think Sweet Baby won't be involved with Wolverine in any way, because again, Mary Kenny here is the associate narrative director on Wolverine right now. Which of all the characters to pick, why would you go for Wolverine? It's so bizarre to me. Since canonically, Wolverine is the most straight character ever. He's not gay at all. He would also likely be the most against woke weirdos out of any of the X-Men if we're being real. If Wolverine actually existed and you told him to respect your pronouns, he would just headbutt you and then light a cigarette and walk away. Yet this character is basically falling into a basin of rainbow-colored piss with Insomniac, and I genuinely have no faith that the game's story or anything will be good. Sure, the gameplay might be fine, it is Insomniac, but the story? You gotta be kidding me. And I 100% expect Wolverine to be sidelined for X-23, his female clone daughter, in either this upcoming game or a sequel. Apparently, according to leaks, Mr. Sinister is the main villain of this Wolverine game, which all but confirms that Insomniac is going to do exactly what I think they will. Mr. Sinister, in case you don't know, he's all about genetics and creating the perfect beings out of the DNAs of other mutants. He did it with Jean Grey when he kidnapped her, and then he made Madeline Pryor, which Cyclops had a baby with. She's Jean's clone. And that's how Cable gets born. I guarantee you. Mr. Sinister is going to be hunting Wolverine down in order to get his DNA to make X-23 a thing. She will either be playable in this first game or second, and by the second, I guarantee she will become the main character, just like how Miles is with Peter. They will lure you in with the straight white male legacy character that people actually want to play as. They'll get you comfortable and all nice, they'll give you what you want for a bit until they pull the rug from underneath you, and then they replace your legacy hero with their diverse replacement that does the exact same thing they do, except they're not white males, so they're instantly better in the eyes of these developers. And I unironically expect Wolverine to look X-23 in the eyes like Peter did to Miles in Spider-Man 2, and say, why would this world ever need me when it has you? Like, you know it's going to happen. Look into your hearts. You know it to be true. They're just using brands we actually love and then replacing them with boring alternative characters. This is going to happen. Sweet Baby will be attached to Wolverine, and I think Insomniac is so confident that they will still sell well because of the IP and, Wolverine and X-Men being a thing, that they'll even put Sweet Baby's logo on the box somewhere as a big F you to everyone. Mary Kenny and DualShockers discussed the GLAAD gaming report as well that came out recently. GLAAD, by the way, it stands for Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Basically, they're an organization that protects and pushes anything that benefits their group. Which, I mean, yes, any organization is like that, but for context, that's what GLAAD is. Anyway, their new report, they say that around 70% of players are LGBT, which now is up from 10% in 2020. Here's more of what GLAAD said in their report, and I quote, GLAAD's finding that 17% of active gamers are LGBTQ, and the growth from 10% of active gamers being LGBTQ from Nielsen's Games 360 study in 2020 proves their tremendous influence on the gaming industry. The study shows that for LGBTQ gamers, a safe and inclusive environment goes beyond the game itself, with nearly 70% indicating they are less likely to buy from a studio with a history of mistreating LGBTQ workers. The scale and growth of LGBTQ gamers is significant. Notably, the percentage of LGBTQ gamers is even higher among younger age groups, with 23 to 28% of gamers under 35 identifying as LGBTQ. The percentage of LGBTQ people in gaming far surpasses that of the general population, according to Gallup's 2022 survey. Although Gallup only surveyed respondents over the age of 18, our survey sample was between people ages 13 to 55 years old. They conservatively estimate that 7.2% of American adults are not cisgender and/or heterosexual. Similarly, Gallup's most recent data indicates that Gen Z adults have the highest percentage of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender respondents over 18, which is at 19.7%. LGBTQ active gamers overall report similar levels of dedication to games as non-LGBTQ gamers in terms of average hours played and money spent. One point of divergence is that LGBTQ gamers play significantly more on mobile platforms than non-LGBTQ gamers. While this report primarily focuses on PC and console games, this disparity is clearly an area for future research. Counter to stereotypes, LGBTQ gamers make up 19% of heavy core game gamers, defined as playing 10 or more hours per week on PCs or consoles. End quote. My god, how many times am I going to say LGBTQ in this video? So, LGBTQ people won't buy games from studios that apparently abuse their LGBTQ workers. Which is just a straight up lie, because The Last of Us Part 1 and 2 are celebrated by the entire industry, and their fan base and those are pro-LGBTQ. They literally have Ellie in it, who's a lesbian that they champion all the time. And pretty much any LGBTQ pro game now is doing the Last of Us strategy with their game too. Lure people in with a straight white male protagonist, then depower or outright kill them in the sequel, and then replace them with someone who's more diverse. This is also why in the new Assassin's Creed Shadows, they're adding the ability to let Naoe and Yasuke be gay, because it's to pander to things like GLAD, for example. And like I've said in previous videos, if you don't pander to some degree, your games pretty much they get ignored come award season. They even have awards like Games for Impact, which is just a fancy way of saying your game pandered the hardest, so here's an award for your efforts, basically. Hogwarts Legacy, for example, got removed from award seasons because of J.K. Rowling, even though the game had gay and trans characters in it. All that proves is that it isn't enough if you pander every single facet of your company to the IP, to the creators, and more. They must embrace and accept LGBTQ values, or you are thrown into oblivion. This next part in the DualShockers article is just wild, man. It starts with the headline saying LGBTQ gamers don't feel seen, which is a crazy statement to make, since you and I both know every game in existence made by Western studios, at least, they pander like crazy. Like, come on. How many pride flags are there in every yearly Call of Duty game? What about Western slop like Life is Strange or more? There's representation like never before, and like I said in the beginning, no matter what you do, it is never enough. Here's some of what Mary Kenny said in this DualShockers interview, and I quote: "In the decades since, this has proven true in fan communities, conventions, and multiplayer games. The GLAD report tells us something key. Games are a way for LGBTQ people to socialize, but it also tells us something heartbreaking. That LGBTQ gamers don't feel that developers are thinking of them when they design games. There are so many LGBTQ developers, and we want what players want, to design experiences that tell the player we're here, we're important, and we belong. We need to pull every lever we have." End quote. This is crazy, because if Mary Kenny was talking about video games in maybe 2010, this would be more so of a true statement when it comes to representation, but these days, no, not at all. There's so much pandering, man, but the truth is that the representation and forced inclusion a lot of companies are pushing are being objectively rejected by players as well. And I would say it's not entirely because people hate gay people, although for some I'm sure that is the case and I'm not denying it. The truth is that the more you push things onto a populace, the less responsive they will become to it. Things need to happen naturally, and sadly for these devs like Kenny, what they're pushing is not feeling natural whatsoever, but instead intended and forced. Dion from Final Fantasy XVI is gay, but it doesn't define his character. Instead, it feels but like a fraction of who he is when it comes to how complicated of a man he is. That is a good LGBT character because his sexuality does not define his every move. On the flip side, we have slop like Suicide Squad, which I don't know if you saw this, but recently they showed their next character, Mrs. Freeze. Yeah, that's right, Mr. Freeze's wife Nora is the next playable character in that dead game. Anyway, she's now an androgynous person who looks Asian instead of white with a short haircut and a body shape that looks neither male or female. And the suit that they're wearing is not flattering whatsoever. This design is peak Western gaming slop, like look at this, come on dude. But in the eyes of Glad's reports and people like Kenny, this design is likely perfect to them. It's everything they want because you can't reasonably look at this design and see anything on it that looks either male or female. It's like Noway in Ask Creed Shadows, even AI can't tell if she's a woman because her face and design is so androgynous. This is what they want in gaming. It's no longer pick between body type 1 or 2 anymore. Now that same philosophy must further be pushed onto the characters themselves so that you can never escape it. It's like that recent Pokemon Go update where everyone's characters went from boys and girls into they-them monstrosities overnight. It's deliberate, it's not organic, and it's being pushed to up those numbers in reports like Glad's. Need I remind you that this has been disastrous for companies like this article, which states the case of the suddenly missing trillions in ESG investments. To give you raw numbers, back in 2020, corporations in the USA were investing around $17.1 trillion into ESG funded projects. A lot of the games coming out recently, TV shows, movies, and stuff that obviously isn't out yet, that $17.1 trillion investment is likely the reason why they all exist. Anyway, these days, those investments are down in the $8.4 trillion bracket, which is, yes, still a lot of money, obviously, but that's almost half of what companies were investing before versus now. Apparently, this may be caused by what's being called greenwashing. And what does greenwashing mean? Basically, it's companies lying about their investments and profits when it comes to ESG in order to boost the confidence consumers have in these companies when it comes to their actions. So if you gave me $1,000 to invest into ESG and I am losing your money at an alarming rate, but I tell you that you're doing great with your investing by inflating numbers in my reports by lying to you, that's greenwashing. It's basically manipulation tactics in order to say ESG is working, which by the way of the looks of it, I mean 17 to 8 trillion in a few years? Yeah, that's not looking good, fellas. But that's what these pursuits and agendas are leading to, which is basically nothing of value. Companies are bleeding money through their butt cheeks trying to appease these ESG numbers to increase their scores, and it's resulting in many of them just losing money for nothing. And then you have game companies just evaporating into the ether like Arcane Austin or Volition to name a few because of their ESG games like Redfall and Saints Row Remake. And I think when Insomniac's Mary Kenny says we have to pull every lever we have, that's corporate speak for we are desperate to make this work and be accepted. But it's not working. I mean, Insomniac, for the first time in years, they had layoffs after the release of Spider-Man 2. For what we know, Spider-Man 2 costed Sony around $315 million to create. And it needed to sell 7.2 million copies in order to break even. By the end of 2023, it had sold around 10 million units. But even then, the investment and time spent making Spider-Man 2 likely wasn't enough to appease investors. Because remember that Insomniac was bought by Sony and turned into a first-party studio in 2020, it was reported that Sony spent $229 million acquiring Insomniac in total. So they spent almost $100 million more on Spider-Man 2's development than it cost Sony to own the studio that makes those games. That's insane. To say that game budgets are out of control is an understatement, but it also confirms that for these AAA games, they need to sell in the millions in order to be profitable. And I think personally, if you want to ensure your game does sell well and doesn't bleed players, you need to ensure that you don't alienate people. And I think in Spider-Man's 2 case, from the forced LGBTQ inclusion whatever, from the scenery to missions, not to mention sidelining Peter from Miles, and the negative word of mouth that came out a few days after its release, that has affected sales. Again, sure, 10 million is a lot, I get that, but it could have been higher if the fan base and social media didn't feel like that they were being betrayed by Insomniac by all of their moronic decisions with the game, making Peter weaker to make way for Miles. That pissed off a lot of people, dude, myself included. pushing a playable Mary Jane onto us again and then making her somehow uglier with a crimson chin did not help people accept her as a playable character in the sequel. And they even somehow fumbled Venom and made him not nearly as cool, with Harry being the host instead of Eddie. Harry in general, he just kinda sucked in this game, to be real with you. Then you add in the deaf girl mission, Miles having missions where he can't move as Insomniac forces game romance scenes on you and more, and yeah, it's honestly a miracle it even broke even. It's death by 1,000 cuts in this case, and their huge investment resulted in some profits, sure, but also layoffs as well. And remember that while Spider-Man 2 was a Sweet Baby product, none of us really knew what that meant or who they were when Spidey 2 came out. Had Spider-Man 2 released in the same form it was now this fall instead of last year, but the player base and online community was informed of the Sweet Baby as it is now, I feel like it wouldn't have broken anywhere near 10 million units, and I'm sadly being totally serious about that. Look, I love Spider-Man, he's my favorite superhero, and I think Insomniac is a great developer when it comes to the fun factor of their games. Spider-Man 2018 is still one of the best superhero games, if not games I've played in a while. But despite them having a rock-solid foundation when it comes to gameplay mechanics, combat, web-slinging, and so on, even the graphics too, it was all great. None of that matters if ultimately the story, characters, and the respect of the player's love for Spider-Man, as in Peter Parker as a character, is disrespected constantly. You can't feasibly be making games that cost $300 million plus and be gambling the livelihoods of hundreds of devs because you want a virtue signal. You just can't do it. But I guess in Insomniac's case it was fine to do because the loss of employment for the people who were laid off was worth those pandering moments in their game, I guess. And in terms of Spider-Man 3, it looks like Peter will be even more sidelined since Insomniac has hinted that Cindy Moon, or Silk, will be playable in the third game. Why the hell do we need another playable Spider-Person in a game like that? We don't, by the way. But the only reason they're adding her is because she does what Spider-Man does, but she's an Asian woman! Which means she's immediately better than Peter in every way because she's not a straight white male, I guess. And I'm telling you now, Insomniac, if you want your layoffs to continue, then go ahead and keep sidelining Peter, and remember that when Wolverine comes out, which will be what, 2025? Maybe even 2026 fall, by then the name Sweet Baby will be like a heretical mark upon your skin at that point. Do you really want to spend 4 or 5 years of development to release something that nobody wants to support because of the identity politics? Do you truly think that's a good idea? Look at Naughty Dog right now. Their second Last of Us game, it sold half of what the original did. And there was this whole online discussion a few days back where Neil Druckmann basically said he wants to replace real workers with AI workers, which apparently was misrepresented by Sony themselves, and then Neil had to go to Twitter to fix that narrative, which is just a big bizarre chain of events for everyone because it just damaged Naughty Dog's and Neil's reputation even more. Yet he was published and pushed by Sony themselves, which is just confusing for everyone involved. Why would you misrepresent your own studio and creators? I have no idea, but that's what they did. But I feel like what we're seeing today in modern gaming, from the explosion of LGBTQ everything, it kind of has a patient zero moment in my opinion, which is when Ellie kissed Riley in the Left Behind DLC for The Last of Us. Ever since then, activist weirdos have been frothing at the mouth to somehow recreate that level of wonder again in their games. And since then, we've seen so many failed attempts, it's insane, man. These companies and studios are gambling people's lives for virtual pats on the back, and I can't believe that's real. And yet we were also seeing games that just do fun first, making all the money while keeping politics out, like Palworld Helldivers or something like Elden Ring. Even in the movie space, the stuff that doesn't push any politics ends up doing the best. This year alone, stuff like Godzilla vs. Kong 2 are some of the best performing movies of the year. Why, you may ask? Because it's about a big lizard and monkey, and that's all people want. I don't need some pink-haired feminist who takes 5 pills a day so they don't stab someone staring directly into the lens and saying my pronouns are they, them, or something. Just give us what we want. We want big monkey and lizard fighting, we want cool boss battles, fun gameplay, and non-predatory monetization. We don't want ugly Mr. Freeze's wife with all of her hall monitor haircut and amorphous body shapes. We want Stellar Blade's Eve, who actually looks like she's female. By the way, Stellar Blade is one big as the whole censorship thing has been reversed to an extent. Even Grum said via Twitter that we did it and we successfully reversed the changes, so now all of you waiting on playing Stellar Blade, please go and play it now. I already platinumed the game and I really enjoyed it, but now you can enjoy it with no censorship. They also added new outfits that pretty much look exactly like the previous outfits that were censored, but now they aren't, so yes, it's a roundabout way of saying that the fans won in the end. And then there's this article from that Park Place which states that Paul Tassi of Forbes got mad that Shift Up gave players what they want, and honestly, don't harass Paul Tassi. He's a journalist, and unfortunately for his job, he can't really critique things like this, which kinda sucks for him. And he basically needs to be a yes man to some degree in order to get codes and whatnot. It's the nature of being a modern games journalist. Which is why I am so thankful I am not one of them, but instead a weird gremlin YouTuber guy instead. Because I don't care if I don't get sent a code for a game, I'll say it how it is without any of the corporate speaker editors breathing down my back. This is a big win for players and it should be celebrated. And when you look at Stellar Blade's changes and wins, that's what players want. We don't want ugly, amorphous Mrs. Freezes or our heroes getting depowered and sidelined to make way for diverse alternatives. Just give us what we want. Look, I don't mind that playing as Miles in a Spider-Man game, but he should have his own games. I actually like the Miles Morales spin-off game. I 100%ed it too when it came out. But we have to stop lying to ourselves that we need to remove legacy heroes to make way for these other characters. Your best decision would be to let Peter have his own mainline Spider-Man games and let Miles have his own too. And if we need to have X-23, I guess let her have her own game too. I wouldn't mind an X-23 side game, but let Wolverine, as in Logan, James Howlett, be Wolverine in the game that's called Wolverine. That's all I ask. If that's too hard to do and you gotta keep pulling all of these levers or whatever, then your failure will come and you deserve it. We're giving you ample time, literal years worth of time to change these things. So if come 2026 or whenever Wolverine releases, and Logan is wearing a rainbow Wolverine suit and looks directly into the camera and says Black Lives Matter, I don't know what to tell you, Insomniac, I really don't. You still have time to change these things and not shit on the trust and dedication of your player base. You just need to stop letting activists run your ships into icebergs like this. Your narrative director saying that you gotta flip every switch and turn everything gay is not going to end well for you. We don't hate gay people or anything, but we are sick of constantly having agendas pushed in our faces. Just make good games and stop wasting your time and company money. Your side already lost half of their funding in a few years when it comes to ESG. How much more are you willing to lose? I guess time will tell, but what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching, like, subscribe, and share, and thanks to my patrons for their undying support. I just want for this medium that is video games that I love to keep getting better, so let's save it together, and I'll see you in the next one.